Awesome. Kia ora, welcome everybody. We're really excited to have you here today. Such a great turnout, and I'm not surprised, we've got a great group of speakers. If you haven't heard, this is the first in a B Local webinar series. So the B Locals of New Zealand are teaming up to host bi-monthly webinars on B Corp centric topics. So we're going to be going through the impact areas, and B Local Wellington is up first. So that's myself and Claire, from Springwood.
Hi everybody.
So yeah, we're really excited to get things off and to see so many wonderful people here. So today we're going to learn a bit more about the proposed B Corp changes, especially how it relates to climate. Such an important topic to every business, especially B Corps. And yeah, we're really excited to have Toitū's own Austin here. So yeah, I will introduce our panel and speakers soon. But yeah, just to cover the housekeeping again, please feel free to keep your cameras off if you'd like, but we're going to record it just so we can use this for future resource. There's going to be 25 minutes at the end for the questions for our panel, so please ask questions in the chat as we go. Otherwise, you will be able to raise your hand and ask questions directly to our team as well if you'd like. So we'll jump into it. So introducing our panel today, we have Suzanne Etty, joining us from the B Corp Climate Collective. Wonderful, joining us from Melbourne, so it's a bit early there for her. Austin Hansel, the product manager at Toitū Envirocare, and Brian Johnston, Chief Impact Officer at Kogo. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Suzanne Etty. She's the Global Environmental Impact Manager in Intrepid Travel, and is co-leading the B Corp Climate Collective with their chair, Sasha Tishkovsky, since 2020. So over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Lee. And Woman Jacker, hello. I'm calling in from Melbourne today. So a real pleasure to meet you all virtually. And I just wanted to take our next 5 minutes to speak about the B Corp Climate Collective. So that's really powered by fellow B Corps, and that includes employees from Verdecon, Pangolian, Culture Amp, and others. And we volunteer our time to support other B Corps to take climate action. So as business and individuals, we do know that our collective action can have a real positive impact on the future of our climate and planet. And that's why we were calling on the community of B Corps to collaborate on the pressing issues of climate change, as the science shows us that the time to act is now. We started coming together in 2020 at the time when we experienced the devastating wildfires here in Australia. What are the key objectives of our B Corp Climate Collective? There are three. First, we want to encourage all B Corps to measure their carbon emissions and develop meaningful reduction plans. Secondly, we want to encourage all B Corps to really reduce carbon emission by switching or committing to 100% renewable energy. And third and last, we want to see all B Corps to combine their influence and advocacy for a just transition to a low-emission economy. So over the years, we have focused on knowledge sharing and collaboration, and that's really to support our B Corp community. We have developed a range of free resources designed to really help businesses and the community to take action. And we recognize that business are on very different steps in their individual climate journey. So we have developed, for example, climate milestones to help businesses to identify their progress, and other initiatives to design to enable them to take that next easy and effective climate action on their climate journey. So a resource, for example, that you can find on our website is the B Corp Climate Action Roadmap and Pathway Overview. So for more information on how to take meaningful action, like these tools, you can actually visit our B Corp Climate Collective website. I will put the link to the website later into the chat window so you can all access it. So in closing, if you're passionate about creating change for climate and want to make a greater impact, we'll really love to hear from you. And I'm handing over to Lee.
Actually, I'm gonna jump in here. Thanks, Suzanne. That's so great. As soon as you were talking, I was like, how do I get access to these resources? And I know that Lee has already popped a link in the chat there. So we're on track. very excited to have a look at those in a bit. So yes, I would like to introduce the amazing Austin Hansel from Toitū Envirocare. So Austin's been with Toitū for over 11 years. She's their product manager on their impact team and their beekeeper. She's also participated in the first round of the standards consultation with B Lab and has added all her expertise to that process. So I'm so excited to hand over to Austin.
Kia ora. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And I would, as a former member of the B Corp Climate Collective, really encourage you to think about whether you have the space to volunteer at least something. It's a really wonderful group of voluntary sort of climate action. It's a great group. Let's see here. I do have some slides which we will share after this for everyone if you'd like to take a look. Let's see here. All right, there we go. Right, morena, everyone. So we're going to start today by looking at the proposed changes to the B Corp requirements. And I'm not part of B Lab, but I did participate in the consultation quite closely. And have been, I will share the sort of materials around that are coming out of B Lab, but I am not B Lab, so just be aware of that. But looking at the proposed changes to the B Corp requirements, and today we're going to really focus on the ones around climate action. So these changes are still proposed. They've gone through a preliminary consultation last year, and B Lab just released the report of those initial consultation results, which is pretty interesting reading. We're expecting the next round of consultation later this year. We'll dive into the climate action changes in just a moment, but I wanted to also highlight a shift that B Lab is proposing around the actual certification process. So at the moment, you earn at least 80 points overall across the different areas, and instead in the new standard, there will be a set of minimum requirements across 10 areas, one of which is climate action. And that effectively makes climate action mandatory for everyone rather than something that you can maybe do later because you have your 80 points from other activities. It also means there's going to be a really nice consistent baseline for anyone who's claiming to be a B Corp. So you know that if you see that B Lab, the B Corp mark out there, you're going to see, you can assume that they've all done at least this base level of work, which is really, I think, going to be a really powerful step for the B Corp community. So under the future B Corp standard, there's 3 climate requirements that will be mandatory for everyone seeking B Corp certification, assuming that these all make it through the consultation process. In that, there will be sort of specific details and nuance, no doubt, in the actual requirements, different types of companies, different size of companies. And I think some of those details will get more clarified as the consultation continues. So we'll focus a little bit on the higher level requirements to start with. So the first requirement that has been proposed, your company tracks its greenhouse gas emissions annually. This is going to apply to emissions in scope 1, 2, and 3, or if those terms are not familiar to you, the full range of activities that are associated with your operations, but also out in your value chain. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And thinking about, your upstream suppliers, your operations, your staff, downstream and your customers, waste, that kind of thing, that full chain. You'll be asked to calculate your footprint in line with an approved methodology. So in most cases, that's going to be an external framework or standard and that external framework will have a lot of the details on, what, how, what do you have to include? What can you justify excluding? There's standards such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, ISO 1464 Part 1, or the Product Lifecycle Sister Standard 1467. There are likely going to be some other pathways potentially for some smaller companies, but effectively, at the end of the day, your organization will need to know the ways that it is impacting the climate each year by quantifying, measuring its emissions. Now, as with so many things, once you've measured, you can do something about it. So the next requirement is implementing a climate transition plan to ensure its fair contribution to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. This basically means a plan to reduce your footprint, but specifically a plan that aligns with the global climate science. It means that you're doing your fair share of the mahi to limit the heating of our atmosphere so that people and nature have the best chance to adapt to the impacts of a rapidly changing climate. That's where that 1.5 limit is coming from. The specific target for your individual company, that would vary depending on, what's your baseline year, what's your target year, but effectively you'll be expected to have a near term, which is typically 5 to 10 years, target that aligns with that climate science. So as a common example, if you're comparing 2020 to 2030, it's typically a 42% reduction by 2030. Your transition plan, that full transition plan, as with any good project plan, will include, how are you going to reach that target? What are the metrics, the projects, the rate of change? How are you going to monitor progress? And part of that proposed requirement is also the fact that you'll be asked at each recertification under B Corp to show how you're progressing against your plan. So are you, you lay out your plan, and then each time you go through the B Corp recertification process, how have you improved? How are you tracking against that plan that you've set out? The details, I think, will probably evolve quite a bit through the consultation process. Some of the findings in the initial consultation report are interesting and around that sort of the level of nuance there. But I think it's very clear that having a plan to decarbonize will apply to all companies wanting B Corp certification. Now, there is a third requirement as well, and the third requirement is really interesting. So it's proposing that the company will have a track record of climate action. And when you look at the wording, it's an entry-level requirement. So that track record isn't something that you're showing at recertification each time, but it's something that you're showing as an entry-level requirement to get certified the first time under the new standard. So there's a few ways that they've defined a track record in the proposed standard. We'll see how these evolve, but that track record might be things like action assessed against your own plans. It could be against sort of peer industry benchmarks, showing that you're below industry averages, working on how you're supporting wider impacts, so effectively sort of wider societal systems change, that kind of thing. Now, the new standard isn't going to come into effect for probably another year or two. I think it's around 2025. So you have some time to build your track record now before that standard is live, so that you have it ready for that first audit that hits you once that standard is live and in effect. And I also thought, for those of you who are maybe a little concerned or surprised that this is an entry-level requirement, I thought a little bit of climate context might help. So globally, we've agreed to aim for that 1.5 degree limit. That's how much we want to limit the heating of the global atmosphere. And when you look at the climate science, you look at our current state, where are we right now? It's a rather brutal assessment that works out to mean that emissions must peak globally no later than 2025. So we need to bend that curve downward within the next sort of year, 18 months. And then globally, the total must be reduced in half by 2030. That's 7 years. So it's a really short time frame, essentially because at a global collective scale, climate action has been slow or neglected in some cases for so long. We have a lot of catching up to do, which is really unfortunate for us now in the next sort of the rest of this decade. And I would imagine that this is really why, a core reason why B Lab is proposing that this is an entry-level requirement. By the time these standards will take effect, we all need to be on this journey and showing some form of rate of change here. Now, those are the requirements that have been proposed there. And so these would be the three main climate action requirements that every company would be expected to show in order to earn that B Corp certification. So with those requirements in mind, and the fact that the sooner we all get started on this journey and keep making progress on the journey, I'll shift a little bit more firmly now into my Toitū Envirocare role. We'll talk a little bit more about business climate action. For those of you who are less familiar with us, Toitū Envirocare, we're a purpose-led organization. For the last 21 years, we've been focused on catalyzing action for a zero carbon future. We're a subsidiary of Manaki Whenua Landcare Research, a New Zealand government-owned research institute, and we really hold fast to those roots in science. We're a business, but we are a purpose-driven one. We're very proudly B Corp certified. All of our revenue is reinvested back into the business. So we don't generate profit for our shareholders. It's about how do we expand our impact. And the primary way currently that we achieve that impact is through our climate certification schemes. These set out the rules of, this is what good climate action looks like. We provide tools and guidance, and then an annual audit that our members are in line with that climate performance. It's accurate, it's complete. So in this way, you can think about us as sort of playing a similar role to B Lab and the B Corp certification. We both develop a standard and check that a company is meeting that standard so that the company can earn the badge to prove and show off their work. Since 2001, we have verified over 3,300 greenhouse gas inventories, which really means that we've looked really closely at business activities and operations generating over 295, I think now, million tons of emissions. So right now, we're working with over 900 organizations across all sectors all over the world. We're quite likely active in your sector and your value chain, if not working with you directly already in some way. We serve quite a few B Corps already. This is just a few of the B Corps that are that we share as sort of mutual members, and they are then able to use their work with Toitū for climate action to earn the points and sort of provide the proof as in their environment standard section at the current standard. Now, in our decades of doing this work, we've found that our clients, they tend to reduce by about an average of 38% over the first 5 years of certification. So basically that sort of, once you get started on this journey, that action and the momentum can cascade out. And those reductions, they have direct ties to cost savings, business efficiencies, innovation, staff and client retention is actually really powerful in this space, resilience, market access in some cases, especially if you're an exporter. And it also, gives you those warm fuzzies because you're doing your fair share to help Aotearoa hit those 1.5 degree goals that we have. And I think that context, remembering those business benefits, is really helpful to keep in mind because especially if you're haven't started your climate journey yet or you're just in those early days, it can absolutely feel a bit intimidating. All this new language to learn, how on earth are we going to do this? Try not to get too mired in those details, and it's one step at a time. And I think also remembering that yes, this is necessary for our world to do, but you're also probably going to become a better business through the process and the lens of climate performance. Think of it as a tool in your toolkit to be a better business. So let's look a little bit closer at what that sort of climate process can look like for most companies. So the key goal is to just get started on the pathway. If you haven't already, climate action is all about continual improvement and progress over time. Don't let perfection get in the way of momentum. It's better to just have some momentum. And of course, while it's good to aim for sort of the best that you possibly can today, know that you can do better tomorrow and better the day after that. It's really about that momentum. Just get started. And that journey, that first step, it always starts with assessing your current state. Where are you right now? So a little bit of Climate 101. Hopefully this is useful to you guys and I'm not kind of teaching you things you already know, but it can help to think about carbon accounting as sort of a matter of tracking activities. That often means tracking money or resources, facilities, that kind of thing, so that you understand, what have you done in your business? And then those things get translated into greenhouse gas emissions. The easiest things to look at are the activities that are under your direct control that create emissions. So think of those as that sort of core direct bubble there in the middle. These are things like that you own, basically, right? So petrol that's combusted in an engine that you own, diesel in a truck that's part of your fleet, that kind of thing. And then as we move out from the core and that sort of chain, the supply chain or the value chain, actually, as you start looking downstream as well, as you move out from the core, the details can be harder to see, harder to measure. You probably have less influence or direct control. So these things tend to be called indirect emissions. You'll hear that language a lot. These are your scope 2s for energy and your scope 3s, your wider value chain. That's all language that you'll start to hear in this space. So that wider value chain, the scope 3 emissions, those indirect emissions, so they're harder to see, you have less influence and control, but they also tend to be where the biggest volume lies. So you have some control in things like how much energy are you purchasing, right? How much electricity are you consuming from the grid? But you don't necessarily have control over how that energy was generated unless you're using specific contracts to do that. You can choose if you're flying, but you can't choose the type of plane you're flying in, right? Like your freight provider can assure you that it'll get from here to there, but may not be able to tell you how. So this space is where it increasingly requires influence and engagement, because it's a sort of collaborative system changes, collaborative action across value chain, partnerships. They're not necessarily things that you can just do within your operations, just sort of under your own control. In the ideal state, everyone in your value chain is collaborating, we're engaging. If everyone is sort of looking after those core direct bubbles, that's going to cover most of the value chain, and the whole thing will collectively reduce. You'll also be able to share sort of more precise data, potentially find new opportunities to innovate or get a bit of an edge. So when you're building out your climate footprint, your greenhouse gas emissions inventory, you basically are going to go through, you're going to find the best data you can to assess how much of these different activities have you done if they apply to you. And then it's a really simple formula to apply an emission factor to something like liters of petrol, and you turn that into tons of greenhouse gases. Now I say it's a really simple equation, but really recommend that you use a reputable tool to do that. It makes it a lot easier and more accurate for you, particularly around knowing which emission factor is the best one to use for the type of data that you have. What is the activity? And do you have an invoice? Do you have, is it an estimate? How do you know? So using a tool makes that just a bit easier for you. That Toitū and plenty of others provide software that can do just that for you. There are some free tools out there, particularly if you're on the smaller size and you're just kind of wanting to get a bit of a sense check. We have a free tool called Carbon Assess, but there's some others out there as well that just give you some good information to kind of get you started, particularly on that core space. And remember, it's just getting started. So it's okay if your data isn't perfect, if it's sort of a bit of an estimate. You're figuring out where are those hottest spots so that you can start zeroing in and trying to improve those things. Now that current state, that sort of, what is that baseline for you? Think of it like a map that's going to reveal the opportunities to improve your impacts and find better data, engage with others. But it's also thinking about where do you need to get to from here. So what are the targets that you need to set? And with the future B Corp standards in mind, with the way that global climate action is evolving and what good looks like, this is going to be a science-aligned target. So those 1.5 degree aligned targets. This graph is from Science Based Targets initiative, who is one of the, it's pretty much the sort of agreed best practice here. Their tools are free and available to use. You don't have to pay any money to use their tools. If you you're welcome to go have a play with those. But kind of looking at what are the curves, are you going to have a wibbly curve that's kind of year on year? Are you going to have a straight line there? What are the projects that you have? There might be some quick wins and maybe you'll have a sharp dip, right? And then there's something that's going to be a little bit slower while you build out a business case. Maybe you need to update some infrastructure or something like that. And then you're going to have another blip down. You might have a steady rate of change because of, the way that you're able to kind of plan some of these things in. Efficiencies, swaps you can make, things you can avoid, quick wins, slower burns, and then kind of on an annual basis, you'll keep reassessing that current state so that you have the way to monitor. Are you on your plan? Does your plan need to change? What else can you do? What new ideas? You'll sort of start building out those proof points and early projects, and that will cascade further action as you start to show some success points, basically. Yeah, so definitely working to aim towards that 1.5 degree trajectory. Now that is definitely a challenging thing to do, but it is possible, and there's a lot of different pathways to get there. And if you're in a heavy emitting sector, SBTI, Science Based Targets initiative, does have some specific sectoral pathways for those heavier emitting industries that kind of help target that sector and specifically. Now, with the plan and pathway, right? So it's really easy to say, hey, you need this math, do this target, and that's your target, and good luck. But how do you get there, right? This is the crux of climate action. There are a couple of levers that you can pull that are going to translate into projects and actions. So reducing emissions can be done basically in its simplest format by either decreasing the activity level or the intensity, or both. So initial efforts, they're often focused around reducing activity levels, like reducing the, I don't know, sort of raw materials because you've changed the product design, minimizing wastage, that kind of thing. The intensity can also be reduced. So potentially, rather than less materials, you're switching to a different material. You're looking at a different provider, something like that. You have avoided a trip and you didn't use that vehicle, or you switch to a hybrid vehicle instead. The sort of avoid the activity level and the intensity level. But with that in mind, there's also something you'll hear of, the mitigation hierarchy. So the best thing that you can do when you're planning out these projects is find anything that you can avoid. Are there things you can just stop doing entirely? Saving money, maybe some efficiencies, but also avoiding those emissions. If you can't avoid it or can't avoid it yet, how can you reduce it? So could you reduce the amount of it or the intensity of it, those kinds of things. And then if you can't do either of those yet, those harder to abate things, that's when you might start looking at things like neutralizing or compensating as a short-term mechanism while you're working on how you're going to reduce or avoid it down the track. So some of the activities in there, thinking about, do you own a fleet? What facilities do you use? Are they, owned or leased? What are the products and services that you provide? What travel or freight are you doing? Can you do it differently? Can you do it more efficiently? Can you do it less frequently? Your project plan, your climate transition plan, will probably include first steps like feasibility studies, or actually, one of your projects might be building out the business case, finding funding from either, looking at internal budgets, looking at external sources of funding like ICA's Giddy Fund, which has been all over the news recently for the big, massive investment that they're doing for NZ Steel. But there's also a lot of smaller investments available from funding like that. Some projects might need collaboration. So some of your first steps might be around, building those relationships within your business, looking at your procurement team, your product designers, your logistics team, your accountants and administrators, but also outside your business. How can you start to engage with your suppliers, particularly those suppliers that have the kind of hottest potential emissions around them? Your customers, how can you better engage with your customers? Could they use your product differently, or do something different with their waste so that there's less waste going to landfill at the end of the stream? Looking across your sector, ways that you can collaborate across your sector, like-minded organizations. Are there ways you can collaborate across your community? There's some really cool sort of community hubs popping up here and there around Aotearoa, and just learning from one another and trying to do things differently. So the end target for climate leadership overall, for good climate performance, for our best world, but also under the future B Corp standard, is that you're going to start embedding climate into your wider sort of operational strategic roadmaps, right? You're just going to have to in order to kind of get to that 1.5 degree. But that is just like what you're doing with a lot of your other B Corp activities, right? So that's a question that I think all of us who are or aspire to be B Corps is a question that we're used to asking in our businesses. How can we do business better? How can we be better? You'll likely find a lot of overlap with the work that you're doing for other B Corp areas already. Work that you're doing to engage your community, your sector, your suppliers. There could well be a climate component in there as well as the social angle. And then you can build up that more resilient community by tackling both together. So this is kind of a high-level carbon journey that you can kind of think about. Where are you on this journey? What steps can you take? But keep in mind, B Corp is going to ask you to meet those certain requirements. You'll need to have details to sort of prove that you've met those things. And as the consultation continues, we'll get some more details around exactly how are they going to define this, what options are available for you depending on your type of organization, what proof points will they accept, that kind of thing. We're going to see a lot more of that coming out. But it is clear that you'll want to have some sort of climate toolkit to help you out in this space. So for your current state right now, think about your current needs, your current impacts. That'll help you determine what is a good tool or provider who can help you right now. You know, do you just need a free self-assessment to kind of start wrapping your head around these things? Maybe, and that works maybe for the first year or so. Do you need a fully verified ISO inventory for other purposes, actually? And so here's just another angle to the business case to get that sorted for you so that you're kind of aiming in that right direction. Do you want to get certified, and then you can make claims and tell stories about this stuff? Having a climate expert and tool will help you point sort of in the right direction, right? You know, you have the confidence that you're doing what good looks like, you're upskilling your people, your work has been checked, and you have support to kind of create your climate story and your bank of evidence for whatever stakeholders you need to tell this story to, not just B Lab. So these are the carbon certification programs that we offer. We're certainly not the only provider in this space. There's a lot of great providers in the ecosystem. But just as an example of the kinds of things that you can look out for. Our carbon certification membership package sort of will tick those different needs for you. So as a member of our carbon programs, you get technical expertise, you get account management, you get a sort of a growing library of guidance and tools and templates, training sessions, so that you can kind of upskill yourself and upskill your teams. You get an annual verification report, an assurance statement, a full inventory report in line with the ISO standards. You get a lot of other materials, and that does tend to feel like a lot if you're a small company, which is very fair. We also have a free tool, Toitū Carbon Assess, which you can just go in and have a play with, which can be perfectly good enough if you're, particularly if you're small, just starting to get a sense, you know, what might my electricity footprint might look like? What might my travel look like? It's good enough information to kind of get you started. So think about, you know, what do you actually need right now? Do you need a full certification pack? And you might, but you might not, and that is absolutely legitimate. We'll keep in mind that we'll want to keep watching the B Lab standards to see, are they going to require something that's fully audited or not? In the original consultation draft, the verification, I think, kicked in once you were a company of 50 employees or greater, but that's definitely subject to change. So it's just something to kind of keep in the back of your head as something that you might need to do in the next couple of years. And the other bonus of verification is that you have a lot of sort of evidence to provide to the B Lab auditors as well. But again, let's wait and see, do you have to have that evidence? Because if you don't, and you have good enough information to take action, that is absolutely the more important thing to do, is just start taking some action. So thinking about it, you know, this is a screen grab from the current B impact assessment. So for those of you who are already or pending B Corps, you'll be very familiar with that interface. At the moment, you can just sort of grab, this is my my work from my company, but you too, I can grab my inventory report and I can grab this number, I can type it in, I can upload a copy of that to proof, and that's what a lot of our other, our sort of mutual clients would be doing there. You have the numbers and the datas and the stats that you need to answer this whole section in the current impact assessment. What are your totals? What are you reducing? You know, how are you tracking on these different things? Are you choosing to offset at this point or not? And so that's the current state. There's also a lot of questions across the other areas of the current assessment that overlap, right? So I know for us, when we started looking at our supply chain and sort of how are we going to screen that for our climate impacts, we also have been leaning very closely on the B impact assessment on what other sort of boxes can we tick at the same time, right? So how can we better engage with our communities, looking at fair trade or fair wages or anything like that as part of our supply chain assessment. So it's not just environment. A lot of these things do overlap quite closely. Under the proposed changes, so this is just a quick screen grab from the original consultation. So these details are the ones that are probably going to change here. So that's thinking about having, you know, having some sort of an inventory in line with one of these accepted standards. You know, what else might you be able to get away with? Are there other calculators or tools that you might be able to use, at least to start with, that kind of thing? Same sort of thing, whatever your climate toolkit is, that from whatever provider or tools you're using, you know, what is the evidence and the answers to the questions that you'll be able to just pull through here. And I think that is all I wanted to prepare, because I feel like we have more questions that'll be more useful. I know there's been some coming through in the chat that I haven't been actually looking at here. We can pull those up, I think, in the question and answer section. So I will hand it back to Lee and Claire.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Austin. It was so interesting, and thank you for making it accessible to a non-carbon expert. I think that my key takeaway is don't let perfection get in the way of momentum. I think that's one thing I'm going to carry with me. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. My favorite things about getting to do these events is that actually our entire panel today, without our knowledge, knew each other from work with the B Corp Climate Collective or other climate activities. So it's so great to be able to learn from these people. So now I'll pass over to Brian Johnston, who's the Chief Impact Officer at Kogo, awesome Wellington business. He's been at Kogo for 3 years, and as a part of the leadership team, he's helping to guide Kogo on their growth and impact journey. What an awesome job title. So over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Lee. Kia ora koutou, everyone. Ko Brian Johnston, Toitū Envirocare. Nice to meet you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak a bit about Kogo. And just firstly, great to hear about where the standard is heading. You know, like B Corp remains credible and strong because it keeps on working sort of incrementally to stay relevant and stay at the right end of spectrum in the sustainability space. So you know, the things that are being discussed in the engagement process and the revision, you know, it's all well in time. So you know, when we hear about things that there's uncertainty, then you know, things won't actually be triggered and active until, you know, 1 or 2 years into the future. So it's good to hear about it, but we don't have to, you know, get worried that it's going to be a requirement in the next 6 months, that kind of thing. Yeah, I was asked to give a bit of an explanation around Kogo's journey in the climate space. We've gone through quite a few pivots in our time, starting off as conscious consumers, but these days the best way to describe is that, you know, we're a sustainability fintech business. So we're in the financial industry, or we're connecting, and our clients are primarily in the financial industry. We sell carbon footprint management products that enable businesses and individuals to measure and understand and then reduce their impact on the climate. So we try to make it as easy as possible for as many people as possible to start engaging in that space, because we feel that's a real pain point. So we do that by partnering with some of the world's largest banks to integrate the functionality into their digital products that connect to their users. So, you know, while working in that side, that is where our focus is in terms of delivering products, you know, services that have this kind of impact that we're looking for. It is still really important for us to be, you know, walking the talk on sustainability, and that speaks back to our sort of history as well. And not only that, but, you know, in market expectations, if you think of sort of trends that are going on there, that both in the B2C, business to consumer, and business to business space, that is increasing. Sure, they are different areas, but we're seeing increasing expectations coming through there in multiple markets. So our approach is, you know, not just focused on carbon in terms of our walking the talk, but also, you know, more broadly environmental sustainability and social capital. So I'll just touch on that really super briefly. You know, we're Living Wage Aotearoa accredited, B Corp certified, and have been recertified early this year, I think it was. And we're also Toitū Carbon Zero certified. So we've made the decision in certain situations to go through a formal certification process because that was important and meaningful for us at a certain time, but it depends on the organization, you know, where you're at on your journey. We're also Climate Leaders Coalition signatories since 2021, and as a fast-growing business in a new kind of area in terms of the products that we're offering, that is quite challenging. I won't touch on that in too much detail, but we do have a target that's aligned with the expectations there, and that's basically to reduce, at this stage it's a below 2 degrees target, and we need to update that to meet the latest expectations. 30% reduction by 2030. But what does this look like in practice in terms of what we're doing, in terms of our operations? Or I wanted to give a few examples of how we've kind of baked in a kind of a low carbon approach as much as we can into our business as usual. What we do is, you know, we don't have any company vehicles owned or leased. Maybe that's, easier for our sector than for some other businesses, and that's always going to be the case. You have to assess, based on what you can do and what you need to do. But we don't have any of those. We encourage public and active transport for commuting, and have an e-bike salary sacrifice is the term support scheme. So that's a slight tax benefit in terms of trying to encourage people into taking that kind of reasonably big financial step. Not as big as an EV, but still a lot more than a manual or an old-fashioned bike. We're a remote-first company, so that means we're really trying to encourage and maximize the number of virtual meetings. Since COVID, that's of course become almost business as usual, or in some areas, that's easier to do than it used to be. But we want to cut down on commuting, and we particularly want to cut down on business travel. So there is still an element of that, and we still grapple with that in our business in terms of we're trying to grow into new markets. For example, in North America, until we've got enough business there, it's not justifiable to have staff there. We don't want to be flying there very often, but we will probably have to go there. Somebody will have to go there, for example, once a year to have that physical presence. So that is a challenge. We offer 2 additional days of leave as well as one of our benefits around people trying to take lower carbon travel options for their holidays. That's just an attempt to try to make it a little bit easier for people to experiment in this space. So for example, I've just spoken to someone who was in my team who's going to be traveling around Europe with an Interrail pass with their young family for their holiday, and they looked into the other options there, and they've decided to go for that. So we're helping to encourage that kind of behavior. Just a little thing that we felt we could do. We're using mostly secondhand furniture and devices. So the device I'm speaking from right now is a refurbished device, and that's our standard approach. So that has a lower embodied carbon footprint in terms of scope 3. Just conscious of time, I won't go into any more detail around that, but we do stuff around office waste as well, and organic waste recycling and so forth. So in terms of measuring and reporting, there are big challenges. Our baseline, for example, right now is just coming off the end of COVID, and also we were much smaller then. So it's I would say probably not a representative baseline, but what do you choose to do? Do you choose to wait for business as usual to occur, and then a year down the track you start measuring? And we wanted to engage and we wanted to get going, but that does introduce some challenges there. We have, over the 3 years we've been doing Toitū certification, we have improved our reporting scope as well as the accuracy. And if you increase the scope of what you're reporting, then your footprint will go up because you're quantifying more of it. So there's that to kind of take into account, and accuracy can have has a positive effect, but it means that your footprint might go up or down. So that's something to be aware of, but that is happening, across so many organizations, to be honest. But it does make it a little bit more complicated to kind of track your progress. But it's a necessary thing, and we felt quite strongly about that. We have recently done stuff in terms of cloud-based carbon. We have data centers that we use on the cloud to deliver our products, and that's important out of sight, out of mind kind of area that we thought for our business is really material. So we've taken some steps to try to measure that more effectively, and also in a way that gives us some levers to drive some reduction, to basically decide on some actions. So I think that's really important as well. Is can't spend all your time on measuring, because then you've got no time, no motivation, or just no capacity to start working on the reduction activities, which are of course super important. So you try to balance those two things. Emissions currently are increasing for us, so we are definitely not perfect in terms of our scope 1, 2, and the kind of the standard scope 3 reporting around business travel in particular. So business travel is a big challenge for us. Work from home is a big part of our footprint as well, because of our remote first approach. But this is maybe just typical. It's just where our hotspots are may not be typical for your organization, but everyone will have hotspots and everyone will have challenges in trying to address it. So we're quite focused on on our own operations and trying to improve on that side, but equally we are working as well on this kind of area. I'm not sure, Austin, if you mentioned it, it's sort of a little bit to the future, called Scope 4, or this kind of value chain emissions that are not included within Scope 3 requirements. And I won't bore you on the details, but let's just say with our products, and this is really B Corp impact business model kind of oriented stuff, we're trying to help help our bank clients to help their users to achieve reduction. And that is like another step removed from sort of the standard Scope 3 approach. And so there's definitely value in that area. The requirements and the ways of communicating what you're achieving are starting to mature. But if you feel, and this is, I think, came up in the B Corp standard revision requirements, there are some there will be opportunities within the B Corp recertification and just generally in terms of communications to be able to make these points if that's relevant for your business. But the quantification and the attribution, like how much credit you can take for it, that's something that needs to be navigated quite carefully. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. That's sort of a bit of an overview of where we're at the moment. The journey continues, and yeah, thanks for listening, and always open to critical questions.
Thanks, Brian. So what do you mean there's a scope 4? What? I'm not ready. But it's so interesting to when you said about the more you are able to measure, the more you start looking into it, actually your emissions, the more you can measure, the more they're going to go up, and to emotionally prepare for that. That's a really good point. I reckon we jump into questions. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and yeah, a bit of a great minds think alike. I feel like as soon as I started to think something, someone put a question there. So yes. So first off, I'm just going to start at the top. Austin, I know that you have already replied to Dave in the chat about the this idea of green energy contracts and and available to B Corp businesses, and are they real, given that New Zealand has a blended power supply? And actually, something Suzanne said, which made me think of this as well, was that whole climate collective and the 100% renewable energy. And I thought, is that even possible in New Zealand? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So it's definitely, there are a lot of the jargon term is contractual instruments, right? So paperwork basically to kind of formally allocate you renewable energy assets. And the New Zealand system is definitely like the energy certificate scheme in New Zealand is still quite young compared to other global regions, but it's kind of growing and developing, and they are real. There are different types of certificates, so you'd want to look at the specific certificate you're looking at purchasing and whether it sort of meets your needs. And like at Toitū, we have some positions on which ones we think are acceptable in this space and which ones we're less keen on. But it's a really useful kind of way of influencing the shift, right? So you're basically voting with your money to say we want more renewables in the grid mix, right? And so then it prioritizes those and kind of encourages providers to make the switch. And the best renewable energy certificates are often ones that are funding more renewable generation. That's where the money is actually going by purchasing that. There's other types of contracts though too. So you can get a supplier sort of purchase agreement, a power purchase agreement, or other type of contract. There are providers in the market space who genuinely only put renewable energy into the grid that sort of matches the amount that consumers are taking out of the grid. So you can't, with the grid, it is blended. You can't really trace one electron from a dam all the way through to your house, but you can sort of make sure there's a really good paper trail around you've consumed, let's say 50 kilowatts of energy, your provider has guaranteed that at least 50 kilowatts of renewable energy is in the grid. And so, and you kind of have paperwork to say that those electrons belong to you, even if who knows where they actually ended up. And again, it's a really powerful way to vote with your dollars, right? Like you're rewarding those providers with your money, and it's going to influence the shift. Once we're a fully renewable grid, those kind of contracts will probably change. There's other type of contracts too, where you can purchase, like if your neighbor has solar on the roof and they produce more than they need, you can purchase it directly from them and do like a direct line transfer. So they are real. There's a lot of different ones, but you'd want to look closely at your specific contract and what it's doing. And I'd also say, think about them as sort of short-term it's paperwork, right? So it's not a real reduction necessarily, but it's part of using your money to vote for that just transition and supporting our transition globally, systems change, and kind of compensating for what's happening right now. So similar to offsets in that way, in that there's paper and good things are happening and you're voting with your money to sort of support that just transition, but it's not necessarily changing what you yourself have done, if that makes sense.
So interesting. Gosh, and technical. Okay, so
that's a great response. Thanks, Austin. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Okay, so just thinking about Kathy's question here about small companies in carbon measurement, and I know that you've spoken in the chat about feeding back the that potential experience to B Lab, but it was sort of, it's something similar to what I was thinking, that my company Springload, we've been offsetting for a long time now, really luckily, and over 10 years, and we've over that time made reductions, and it feels like to us, to me, that we're a service company, so it's an office, it's rent, it's the electric we use to make the thing we use, and I think I joked the other day with Lee about, there's only so much you can tell people to turn the light off in the bike room. Like, we're at the end. I don't know what our next move is to reduce our carbon impact. So I'd love to, I guess, any suggestions of other levers we can pull that maybe we haven't thought of yet to help us. Because I guess my thinking is, and I guess just looking for inspiration, that if we were to enter into this new accreditation world with B Lab, and they would want us to continue reducing, I guess almost what happens when you get to the point where you have reduced a certain amount. And but obviously I don't expect you to answer that.
That's I think that's not just a B Corp question, it's a question that pretty much all of us are asking, and particularly smaller companies, but for some of the larger companies as well, where you're waiting on systems change or waiting on technology before the next kind of big leap can happen. And so in some ways, the best thing you can do is be vocal, and how are you trying to influence and engage and advocate for that systems change? Even if you're not actually changing your provider, are you talking to your provider and kind of being noisy about it, or trying to find a collective voice for that louder voice? What can you do across your sector or your community to try and influence change in that space? Because a lot of us in New Zealand, we are a country of small businesses, and so it feels like we're too little to be heard, but collectively we can be very loud. And I think some of the things that you can do around paying it forward, which it looks like, at least so far in the wording, is likely to be one of the options around the track record, particularly if you're small, is that sort of how are you helping others transition, or kind of advocating and engaging in that systems change space? Are you supporting the just transition? Are you, some of those kinds of things might be good levers that you can pull as well. So I think that's going to be a really interesting one to watch for B Lab, and specifically the nuance there, but it does look likely that that will be a pathway. And then I think otherwise, you do the best you can, and then you're just kind of shouting loudly about, hey, we all have to do this, because it is an act of collaboration. We can't do this in isolation, which isn't an easy kind of practical answer of like, oh, I'll just add that to my to-do list, right? But being noisy is definitely something that I would put on everyone's to-do list.
Love it. Brian, I also just thinking about, I guess, the scope 4 option and kind of going to your end product as well is another option. And I think you mentioned there about I guess cloud hosting and all the emissions out in the cloud.
Yeah, we went through, I think it was with Toitū as well. We there's a tool, I can't remember if it's just freely available, Austin, or not, in terms of scope 3 kind of scanning. So you kind of look at your spend, and then you look at the categories and so forth, and that gives you a rough idea. For us, again, felt a little bit unusual. There's a lot at a certain stage we didn't have a lot of staff, and therefore a lot of leaning on sort of consulting support. So consulting spend came up really high, and then it's kind of, well, that's a lever. What do you do? But yeah, that sort of gives you an idea of maybe your initial hotspots, and then you can sort of start to dig in. So there's kind of some of that. You'll have some influence versus sort of more easy or bigger, say, levers that you can push and pull, but it's sort of a balance of those things, the things that you think are accessible versus the things that are kind of quite big hotspots for you in your scope 3. So for us, cloud computing was one that we wanted to look into. We also want to, I guess, be a bit noisier about this as well. So back to that point, it is a little bit bespoke at the moment. We worked with somebody to have a go, financially, in terms of how much of it is how much of it our footprint it is, and how much it costs to get some support on that versus, say, a whole carbon certification. It's still not not fully justifiable, apart from wanting to make more noise about it and get people moving, more companies active on this, which should reduce the cost. But we thought, like we're so reliant on these services, it's so integral to what we do, to have no idea, which is I guess the status quo right now, for our business was too much of a gap and too risky, I thought. And also we have a whole software engineering team that is really keen to engage in this kind of area and try to optimize energy use, which basically relates to the carbon footprint. So yeah, internal people were keen to engage too.
I love that.
Do we reckon we've got time for one more question? I think we can do it. This question's from Joe. With regards to scope 3 emissions through the supply chain, how do we delineate responsibility for the emissions of other businesses and services you engage with? Inward freight, is the freight provider responsible for their emissions, etc.?
So this is where using a specific sort of tool and framework can be helpful, because it will lay out the rules of kind of how you allocate responsibility a little bit. Sort of at a high level, the kind of the best way is that you're responsible for a portion of it, right? So like freight, traditionally, if you're paying for the freight, it's definitely your responsibility. But the freight that's happening because of business choices that you're making is also your responsibility, but it's a little bit more of a shadow than a footprint in some ways. It's harder to see and control and measure. And so kind of best advice is that you're doing your best to measure all of those things, but knowing that you won't necessarily be able to directly change it, you're probably going to be talking to your freight provider, which there's a lot of, in New Zealand at least, there's a lot of sector engagement trying to deal with freight systemically across the entire sector. Some really cool work happening there. But yeah, like sort of it's their direct responsibility and it's your indirect responsibility. And there are ways of kind of accounting for that formally and kind of allocating different portions out. So, what's the portion of their total freight that kind of is going to your business? But I would also say it is not a bad thing if both of you are counting that freight, because then there's two sets of eyes looking at it and trying to do something about it, and therefore more likely that it's going to change. It would probably, if you're going to offset it, you don't necessarily both have to offset it, and there's rules in place around that kind of thing. But it's double counting is not a bad thing if it means that you're both looking at it and trying to make change. But there are rules, particularly with things like ISO or a certification program, that they'll kind of help you map that out specifically. And a lot of the scope 3 tools are really helpful for some of that stuff too. There's some really cool ones coming out. I feel like every day there's a new tool announced, but some of that thing like spend base, how much of you spend as a way of allocating what might be your portion.
Yeah, and I think there's a point there around the expectations of, say, B Corp standard and just certification in general around scope 3. So scope 1 and 2 are still the things that you're going to be looked at most closely on. You've got to have a decent footprint, and you've got to show some actions showing reduction. And scope 3, it will kind of depend, but if you look at some things where you've got easy access to data and you can actually, good levers like business travel is a traditional one that's been around for quite some time. But if you're looking into the whole freight logistics and sourcing and the supply chain and so forth, there's a lot of trade-offs in terms of how much time and effort and how accurate you can get your data. And then also the levers, if you don't have levers in terms of reduction, then it doesn't justify, at least in my view, as much that you want to spend as much time getting a really accurate number for a number that you can't change very much. So I think it's quite important to kind of to know that, say, the standards and the targets that are out there, the scope 3 is now being mentioned. It is often the guidance, I think, will continue to get better on it, and you won't be held as responsible. It won't be, you won't lose, say, a certification necessarily because of a scope 3 element at this stage. B Corp, includes it in scope, but it's not. It's part of the picture, SMEs will always struggle, with scope 3 reporting, and you just can't. Yeah, my view has always been, like if you spend all your time trying to get the perfect scope 3 measurement, then you've got no time to do any engagement, and that is counterproductive for what we're trying to do here.
Back that 1,000,000%. That's absolutely, yeah. Sort of get the good enough information and focus with materiality. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I came from a grocery retail sector, so inward freight was actually a significant part of our scope 3.
Yeah.
And whilst we hit, different parts of scope 3, we worked really hard to get them. It was something that we were looking at and going, this is a bit of a, this is a significant proportion of our business, and measurement is one thing, but yeah, like you said, then offsetting is another area, So I wondered where Toitū and other certification providers were at with the need to offset that sort of area for a business such as grocery retail.
We wouldn't ask you to formally offset it because we'd rather you spend that money reducing. The sort of offset boundary that we have is quite constrained deliberately for that purpose, that actually it's better to spend the resources reducing. But it would likely be something that you would be asked to include almost from that sort of intentions and perception risk, like your customers, if you're making the claim to your customers, they're going to expect that that's included. Therefore, you should include it to the best of your ability. But yeah, not necessarily asked to offset it, but more for information so that you can take action on it. And that's kind of a good rule of thumb, is who are you talking to? Would a reasonable person expect that that's something that you're doing something about or know something about? Then you should probably include it to the best of your ability. Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
Awesome. What a great conversation. This has been an amazing session. And thank you so much to all of our speakers, Austin, Brian, and Suzanne, for being so generous with your knowledge and your time. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up there. Any questions that we haven't answered, I'll do my best to get some answers from our generous speakers, hopefully. I'm just going to pop through the link to sign up for emails on future B Local Wellington events, be that the Aotearoa webinar series or in person in Wellington. If there are any other B Locals in the chat, please feel free to pop your links below. Otherwise, we'll follow up with an email with the recording from today, the slides, and answers to those questions and how to join more of these events. But yeah, hopefully you can leave today with an idea on how you can improve your carbon impact and future-proof your B Corp certification. So thanks again for coming, sharing your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Good, everyone.
Stephen?
That's it, Ron.
Thank you.